I'm Callista.
And I'm Teresa, and this is Terrifyingly Typical True Crime. And along with our always talking about basically movies or TV shows, I think we were going to talk about Lazarus,
Mhm.
which is on Prime, right?
Yes.
So big fan of Sam Claflin. When I think of him, I immediately think of It's Me Before You, right? That's the
Yes,
one.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's just sad. And then I think of Daisy Jones and The Six, which I think he did really good in. Anyways, and of course he's British. The show, set in the UK. So those are some pluses. What about what about you?
Yeah, it makes me think that we've watched a lot of adaptations of Harlan Coben books, and we haven't liked any of them. We like Harlan Coben. We like they're set in the UK. We like that Richard Armitage has been in a lot of them, and obviously we like Sam Claflin or Claflin, whatever. But it's okay.
Yeah, and I like that Bill Nighy is that his I don't know if that's how you say his last name, but I always when I think of him, I mean, this is really, not necessary, but I always think of, Love Actually, when
How
he's
could you
like
think of anything else?
I know he's in Harry Potter and different things, but yeah. Yeah, I don't I mean, we read, like, the Harlan Coben, like, the Myron Bolitar, that whole series, and most of his books, I mean and actually this one, the Lazarus one, isn't actually based on one of his books, so I don't know if screenwriting is now his thing, if he's just gonna write things straight for, you know, television or movies. Because
I mean,
I
go
think
him.
yeah, I mean, go him. But yeah, I mean, and I think that there have been good actors, like you said, Richard Armitage, is that how you say it?
Something like that.
Something like that. Anyway, and what was the one that had Dexter in it? Sorry, I know his name's not Dexter. Safe? Was that the Safe one?
Yeah.
Anyways, most of them have been based on his books, and I mean, I wouldn't say he's, like, the best writer ever, but he's engaging and, like, obviously we kept coming back to his book, so I don't know what the heck goes on with the adaptations, and again, I know this wasn't adapted from a book, but I don't and again, like that they're set in the UK, but they're just not good. I don't know if it's like that they're too stylized or which is not my thing, or I don't know. I mean, what do you think it is?
I think they're definitely stylized, and then I also think, and maybe I'm misremembering, but I feel like they always change it from the book too.
This is a good point. Yeah. Why, people? I mean, it's is there something we want to option your book, but hey, we're gonna change all of these basic things. Yeah, I'm really not a fan of that. I mean, I would say, 99%, I'm always gonna think the book is better. And again, this one wasn't based on a book, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like when you have somebody with some talent and they have some success behind them, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe, like, look at what they've previous done as more than just kind of a general idea. Maybe look at it as like, "Oh, this is the outline we should follow," or "Let's follow more closely," or I don't know, something.
Some.
Yeah, and I could definitely I mean, we've only what is there 6 episodes? And we finished 3, is that
Yes,
right?
we're like halfway through.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the one sister. I knew there was gonna be something with her, and I'm always not a huge fan of, I see dead people.
Almost like it's like The Sixth Sense.
Yeah, obviously we'll finish it, and we like some of the actors, but I feel like so many things are just repurposed in Hollywood, whatever, that I don't know, like, I guess this is an original idea. Why can't things just be a little bit better? Maybe me. I won't speak for you. Maybe I'm just really picky, you
No,
know?
I think we're both super picky.
Yeah. Anyways, we'll finish it and go Sam Claflin and, Bill Nighy. I think I looked him up. He's like, let's say like 76, 77, and go him.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyways,
Already anything else?
not really.
Okay. So we're once again traveling down south to Texas, where quite a few female killer nurses, such as Janine Jones and Kimberly Sines, carried out their crimes. This time, we're talking about unlucky in love Vickie Dawn Jackson, who vindictively murdered a minimum of 10 patients at Nocona General Hospital, including her third husband's grandfather between December 2000 and February 2001. With a population of a little over 3,000, Nocona, Texas is a two-stoplight small town 90 miles northwest of Dallas. That even the Nocona Boot Company, which literally referenced its city of origin in its title, forsook to move its headquarters to El Paso. Home to more essentials than attractions, the Dairy Queen is so popular that out of the more than 600 locations in Texas, Nokona's branch consistently boasts the largest annual sales volume. Its owner even uses the sign out front to advertise civic events and to express motivational mantras.
I mean, what a smart franchisee. I mean, it sounds like getting your dipped cone or blizzard fix may be the only exciting thing to do there.
Yeah, no shade to small towns, but it doesn't sound like it's hopping.
Definitely not. Like many other residents, Vickie Dawn Jackson was a regular at the Dairy Queen. She'd stop in around an hour before her night shift at Nocona General Hospital, wearing one of the 25 nurses' uniforms that hung pressed in her closet. Having worked as a nurse's aide or nurse since high school, the well known medical professional would typically order a taco basket, eat alone in one of the back booths among her former patients, discard her trash, climb back into her beige Buick, then drive to Nocona General Hospital, a single story building located only 4 minutes away from the well loved restaurant. As one of the smallest hospitals in Texas, out of its 38 beds, Nocona General seldom had more than 15 filled at a time. Once she had clocked in, Vicki would make her way down the hallway to introduce herself to all of her patients. Throughout her night shift, she would repeatedly check how they were doing and would pull out a nursing textbook to stay sharp on her breaks. But on December 11th, 2000, 34-year-old Vicki decided to try something new. She picked up some mivacurium chloride, or mivacron, a drug often used in surgery to paralyze the respiratory system in order for an oxygen tube to be inserted into the trachea. She filled up a syringe, then walked along the hallway to find a patient to kill.
15-year-old Vicky moved from Indiana to Texas in the early 1980s. The family had relocated for her younger brother in the hope that the drier climate would help his asthma. Now calling a neglected frame house on the east side of Nocona home, Vicky's father worked as a mechanic, and her mother regularly took on double shifts as a cook at the Nocona nursing home. To help her parents get by, Vicky would follow her mother to the nursing home after school to work in the laundry room. Having taken on more responsibility as a nurse's aide during her junior year in high school, Vicky began bathing and dressing the patients. Her duties also included turning them to prevent bed sores, administering enemas, and cleaning their bedpans. It was often thankless work. Some of the patients didn't want to be staying there, and a few with dementia would attack her, such as by using their dentures to bite her.
Wow, okay.
I completely understand that they're upset and not well, but it's a lot. Despite these complications, Vicky was committed to her role. She had wanted to trade in her secondhand clothes for a nurse's uniform since seeing her great grandmother pass away as a little girl. When she learned about Florence Nightingale from a library book, she decided that she too wanted to dedicate her life to caring for others.
So young Vicky really actually had good intentions?
Well, that's what she says.
Having transitioned from childhood to adolescence, Vicky would occasionally spend her weekend nights at the car wash beside the Dairy Queen with the rest of her classmates. But her place was on the periphery. She never hopped into their cars to go on an aimless drive, so no cruising for her.
Exactly.
Maybe because she didn't want to, or maybe because she wasn't asked. Since she had received little interest from boys her own age, when Johnny McLaughlin, a construction worker who was 5 years older than her, struck up a conversation with her while she was playing Miss Pac Man in a Nocona game room one afternoon during her junior year, Vicky fell head over heels. After only a couple of weeks, she told her parents they were in love, and the pair were married before a justice of the peace. Unfortunately for Vicky, Johnny was on the rebound and the marriage lasted less than a year. Newly divorced, Vicky moved back in with her parents. Once she graduated from high school in May 1984, she began working full time at the Nocona nursing home. She had planned to save up to pursue a career as a licensed vocational nurse, or LVN, by taking classes at a junior college. But that was before she met Leroy Carson, who, like her father, worked as a self employed mechanic. As had been the case with Johnny, Vicky and Leroy's relationship progressed quickly. Leroy told Vicky that he loved her, and less than 6 months later, she was pregnant.
They got married in May 1985 and started their shared life in a home right across from her parents.
Which screams 1980s small town.
It does, but to each their own. Vicky soon gave birth to a son, Curtis, and only a year later, she had a daughter, Jennifer. Finally, in 1987, she enrolled at nursing school. In addition to being a part time student, she worked nights at the nursing home. In spite of the fact that she had lost her free babysitters when her parents returned to Indiana to be with her dying grandfather, Vicky kept pulling all-nighters and managed to become an LVN in 1989. Having been promoted to the position of night shift nurse at the nursing home, she would occasionally bring Curtis and Jennifer to work with her so that they could personally hand out their get well drawings.
Is that sweet? Or was this a night when their dad couldn't take care of them?
I think she was portraying it as the former, all in an attempt to highlight what a compassionate nurse she was, of course.
Hmm.
Even though Vicky would also bring in the romance magazine True Story to read to a few of her female patients, it was becoming clearer and clearer to her that unlike the women in the magazine she picked up every month at the grocery store, she hadn't married the man of her dreams. Despite having the hair she usually dyed blonde in her kitchen sink styled at country cuts, and making the 48-mile trip from Nocona to a glamour shots in Wichita Falls, the photo Vicky had taken of herself dressed in a gold lame jacket and imitation earrings left Leroy just as uninterested in his wife as he had been before. He left her and the kids in 1994, and they signed divorce papers 2 years later. Rubbing salt in the wound, Leroy admitted that the only reason he married Vicky was because she had been pregnant.
Ouch.
It's not like any of us haven't heard of that happening before, but it's still not the kindest thing you can say to an ex partner.
Yeah, of course we've heard that. It just wasn't necessary for him to maybe to maybe say that out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah. Divorced for the second time, Vicky started walking around the block with dumbbells to lose weight. On the weekend, she'd hire a babysitter and go out with a fellow single mother to the Third Spur, a country music dance hall just outside of Nocona. In spite of the effort she went to, Vicky struck out most nights and was left sipping her pina coladas at the table by the bar while watching the more popular patrons dance around her. One evening in May 1997 started out by following this familiar pattern, but Vicky was unwilling to let another night come to nothing, so she decided to draw on her liquid courage. Having prepared herself to march right up to the next man to walk through the door and ask him to dance, she strode up to 31-year-old Kirk Jackson. Kirk didn't shoot her down. Instead, the two sat down and drank. Kirk had beer, Vicky ordered another pina colada. Upon finding out that Kirk was an aide at a nursing home in St. Joe, Vicky couldn't help but think that destiny had led them to meet. 2 months after they had danced to a Garth Brooks song in the Third Spur, on July 4th, they were married in a public park near Lake Nocona. No red flags here.
I'm not saying all rushed relationships are doomed to fail, but in Vicky's case, they kind of are.
Vicky threw herself into their new life by getting rid of the bed she had shared with Leroy and purchasing a waterbed to sleep in with Kirk. She bought them matching recliners to watch TV and brought home a tiny Chihuahua puppy she called Killer.
When Kirk took a job at Nocona General Hospital as a nurse's aide, Vicky applied for the LVN position so that they could spend their nights together.
Time apart is healthy.
The introvert in me flinches every time a couple describes themselves as inseparable. She enrolled at a community college and promised her children that they would have more money and a better house once she became a registered nurse. Although she'd regularly pull out a phrase from one of her self help books to comfort Curtis and Jennifer,
Ugh, what all kids want to hear.
I know I immediately feel better when someone throws a platitude at me. Their life with Kirk wasn't going nearly as well as Vickie had initially hoped. Unlike Vickie, this was Kirk's first marriage, and family life didn't come naturally to him. It seemed that he hadn't gotten his bachelor lifestyle out of his system because he would invite friends over at night to play cards. A few sheets to the wind, the men were unable to keep it down and woke the kids up with the noise. When Vickie confronted Kirk, he called her a bitch. Worried her third marriage was going the way of the first two, she complained to Angela, Kirk's mother and a clerk at Nocona General Hospital, that her son, who could often be seen flirting with the other nurses, no longer loved her.
I mean, what was the point of that?
I guess she really thought his mother would set him straight. Obviously, that didn't happen. By the end of 1999, only 2 years after Vickie's third wedding, Curtis had had enough of his mother and stepfather's tumultuous relationship and went to live with his father. A couple of months after he left, Jennifer moved in with Leroy too. At her wits' end, Vickie started seeing a counselor at a public mental health center in Bowie.
Already in her uniform, Vicky arrived at these before work appointments to give voice to her depression and feelings of rejection. Even though Vicky spoke about her mood swings and freely admitted that she couldn't remember the last time she did something for fun, her counselor used their second session to tell Vicky to pick up adultery, the forgivable sin. Sure that this book was the only answer she needed to Kirk's suspected infidelity.
Because obviously, that's the only problem in their marriage, and everything's going to be just fine when she learns to look the other way.
I mean, I'm assuming this was a male counselor. What the actual fuck?
I wish I had that information. Honestly, I'm just picturing some guy throwing a book at her without looking up from his notes about how whiny his patients are.
I mean, that sounds about right. As opposed to this incompetent counselor, 14-year-old Jennifer knew her mother was going through something. When she came to visit her on the weekend, she'd find Vicky sitting on the front steps or standing at the kitchen stove, staring into space. Once, when her mother was at the stove in an act of cruelty that was completely out of the blue, she spun around and kicked Killer the Chihuahua. Bitch, animal abuse is never okay.
And whoever thinks that people, especially kids, who abuse animals won't go on to be murderers has clearly never listened to a true crime podcast.
Preach. On another weekend visit, Vicky confessed to Jennifer that she was in counseling and might have bipolar disorder. When Jennifer asked what that meant, Vicky replied, "It means I could kill you and get away with it." Concerning as that explanation was, Jennifer didn't think her mom was talking about killing her specifically, but all the same, the next time she spent the night, she left a baseball bat within arm's reach. Whoa, poor Jennifer, way to unload on your kid. And she doesn't need a counselor, she needs a psychiatrist.
As we're going to see, she needed a hell of a lot more than a listening ear. After Curtis and Jennifer went to live with Leroy, their father took Vicky to court, arguing that she needed to pay him child support. The judge agreed, and Vicky was instructed to pay him $300 per month. At the job that was paying for these monthly checks, Vicky would sometimes run into her former classmates. On one occasion, two women who had been cheerleaders at Nocona High and who lived in an area Nocona's less privileged citizens called Snob Hill showed up at the hospital to visit one of their mothers. While Vicky was changing their mother's IV bag, the two women didn't even acknowledge her. With almost 20 years of caring for Nocona's inhabitants behind her, Vicky could name only a few who had treated her as a person worth noticing. She had dutifully stayed with patients as they fell asleep, tended to their wounds, and prepared their medications. Then, after taking them to their cars, she waved them off. They left, and she stayed, left to care for another ungrateful patient.
I mean, she did choose the profession, though it sounds like the options were very limited in Nocona.
But to your point, there was at least one other option. Besides, she relentlessly pursued nursing. Surely, in the years she spent in school, someone had to have mentioned that not every patient would be a pleasure to deal with.
I mean, you would think so. Perhaps she resented them, or perhaps she simply disliked some of the more demanding patients and their self involved families. One such difficult patient was Donnie Jennings. The 100-year-old widow was as fussy as you'd expect the matriarch of one of Nocona's oldest families to be. Despite Vickie's claims that she liked the challenging elderly woman she had first met 10 years earlier at the Nocona nursing home, she admitted that Donnie would hit or spit on her if she didn't get her way. Like her cheerleader classmates, Donnie's family members largely ignored the nurse tending to the cranky centenarian, now being treated at Nocona General Hospital for dehydration and constipation. And I am in no way saying hitting or spitting on your nurse, or anyone for that matter, is ever okay. But maybe they didn't so much as ignore her as focus on their sick family member.
I thought the same thing. When your loved one is in the hospital, your focus is on them.
Yeah, I think that's the norm.
Yeah.
Vickie's opportunity for vengeance against Donnie and her family came on December 11th, 2000, when she took her mivacurium chloride filled syringe into the widow's room. Normally, the drug only forcibly relaxes the respiratory system for the duration of the tracheal intubation. Once the oxygen flow resumes, the medication wears off in around 20 minutes. But with a high dosage and without a tube bringing oxygen into the lungs, the effects become fatal. Within seconds of Vickie injecting the mivacron, Donnie would have struggled to breathe. Foam formed around her mouth and her skin turned blue. Unable to call out, Donnie's paralyzed lungs prevented her from drawing in any of the air she was desperately trying to gasp, resulting in her death from suffocation. That sounds like a horrific way to die.
To know you're dying and to not be able to do anything about it, it's nightmarish. A nurse's aide discovered Donnie's lifeless body at 1:45 in the morning. Even though it was a bit strange that she had stopped breathing after her vital signs had all been holding steady at midnight, no one second guessed the conclusion that the 100-year-old must have died from natural causes. From her position besides the nurse's station, Vickie volunteered to inform the family. She comforted Juvine Foster, one of Donnie's daughters, with platitudes as she struggled to understand how her mother could have died only hours after she had seen her in good spirits. If Vickie had only planned on killing Donnie, that intention didn't last long. It took her a little over a week to realize that she had found the perfect way to settle old scores with her patients and their families. So, early in the morning on December 20th, Vickie injected 87-year-old LG Hudson, a farmer with a broken leg, with mivacurium chloride. LG's son was both an EMT at Nocona General and a part-time minister. Upsettingly for Vickie, he would occasionally promise that all her troubles would disappear if she would just give herself to God. Not even 20 minutes after getting revenge on LG's son, Vickie made her way to the opposite end of the hallway, took out a syringe, and injected 62-year-old Sanford Mitchell with the same lethal drug. Sanford had retired from his supervising job at an electric company and had been hospitalized for cirrhosis. Once admitted, he had ogled Vickie's chest and nicknamed her Nurse Tits.
That's really not great.
It's pretty freaking bad, but still not an excuse for murder. Having retaliated, Vickie returned to LG's room to watch the other nurses attempt to revive him. Amidst the chaos she had created, she told them that Sanford was slumped over and asked if they could go see if he was all right.
Not letting the holiday cheer put a damper on her murderous mood, on Christmas Eve, Vickie went after Barbara Atterbury, a 50-year-old who had been admitted for back pain, as well as Boyd Burnett, an 87-year-old who had been taken to the hospital after he had become disoriented. Boyd died that night, but Barbara lived until December 30th before passing away at a different facility. Both Barbara's and Boyd's relatives had once teased Vickie when they all attended Nocona High School together. Damn, she is vindictive.
And just really petty.
As was becoming her specialty, Vickie orchestrated another double murder on December 29th when she administered fatal injections to 80-year-old James Gore, who had come to the hospital after inhaling food into his lungs. My goodness. And 79-year-old Gertie Matthews, who had a urinary tract infection and dementia. With only 7 hours between the attacks, Vickie set herself apart from the fray, looking on as the other nurses tried to save her victims. In total, 7 patients, none of whom had any major respiratory problems, died after going into respiratory arrest at Nocona General in December 2000. Two of these emergencies happened within minutes of each other, which would have been rare even in a much bigger hospital. Yet, Charles Norris, the hospital's CEO, didn't think there was anything strange about the deaths. Everyone knew that older patients, which most of Vickie's victims had been, were more likely to pass away when the weather was bad. Is that a thing? I mean, they weren't living outside in a tent.
This is true. But apparently, older individuals are more sensitive to both extreme heat and cold because of muscle loss, skin thinning, as well as other medical conditions that make it harder for them to regulate their body temperature. And cold weather also exacerbates other health concerns. For example, the number of snow shoveling related heart attacks is on the rise due to responses like increased blood pressure as a result of blood vessels constricting to retain heat.
So, I mean, I feel kind of stupid for not knowing that, but it does make sense.
It does, but there's no reason to feel stupid. I had to look it up.
All right.
As explainable as some of these deaths might have been, the higher ups at the hospital didn't even grow suspicious after 5 more patients went into respiratory arrest and died within the first 8 days of the new year. On the contrary, the hospital's administration decided the timing was perfect to launch an advertisement campaign that spotlighted every single one of their nurses' aides and nurses.
Is that the definition of tone deaf?
Maybe they put the picture used in this ad beside the dictionary entry. And in this nearly full page ad in the Nocona News, Vickie smiled sweetly from her prime place at the top. Her superior's willingness to ignore the murders left Vickie feeling so untouchable that she decided to take an even greater risk. 65-year-old Jimmy Ray Holder had been admitted after a heart attack. He had been improving, and his son Ronald had planned to visit the following day. He would never get the chance, though, because on the night of January 7th, Vickie killed him while his wife sat right beside his bed. Even though officials at Nocona General failed to notice this brazen attack, not everyone was blind to the strange spike in the hospital's death rate. The editor of the Nocona News, Tracy Messler, mentioned to his wife Linda that rather than the typical 3 to 4 obituaries they usually ran per week, they were now putting out 5 or 6. The 2 local funeral homes were doing so well that they were looking into upgrading to new hearses.
My God.
I mean, you gotta invest in your future growth. That said, not every business was benefiting. The Dairy Queen had made a practice of providing paper plates and cups for post funeral receptions. While that hadn't been a problem in the past, with all the deaths, they now worried they soon wouldn't have any left.
Oh my God. Aren't they the Dairy Queen that is making money hand over fist? They're worried that what they're gonna have to go to, the Walmart in the next town over and buy some more?
I mean, it's a good point, but I guess you don't want to cut into you don't want to lose that award.
I mean, I guess not. And it wouldn't have been fair to say that no one at the hospital was concerned. The doctors and administrators may have been happy to shrug their shoulders and blame the season, but some of the nurses were, at the very least, paying a little more attention. They might not have suspected Vickie of murdering her patients, but they were aware of the fact that the deaths had all happened on the night shifts. A few of them even nicknamed the night shift the killing crew. One nurse noticed that Vickie was the last person in the vicinity before multiple patients went into respiratory arrest. Another thought it was strange that Vickie would walk out of the patient's room to the nurse's station to alert her colleagues of their breathing trouble instead of yelling to get them immediate help. And one RN witnessed the glazed look Vickie wore as she moved toward the rooms of the more challenging patients, announcing, "I'll take care of it," or "I'll fix it." But rather than going to talk a patient around, Vickie kept on killing. On the night of January 11th, a nurse walked in to see the lifeless frame of 82-year-old JT Nichols, a machinist with pneumonia who was once known for lending money to young Nocona women in need. 3 hours later, a different nurse realized that 78-year-old John Williams, a former rancher and oil man who had been admitted for a sore on his foot, had also passed away.
John's death was only the first part of Vickie's plan to get payback. Once he was gone, she waited by the hospital's front door for Pat, John's son, to appear. Now a maintenance supervisor at a pipe manufacturing facility, Pat had been the object of young Vickie's longing. But unlike in their youth, Pat was no longer ignoring Vickie. In her role as his now deceased father's nurse, she offered her condolences and recounted how John had told Vickie he had made peace with death while smoking a cigarette outside a few hours earlier. Pat was more than a little confused by the anecdote. His father hadn't been on death's doorstep, so the comment didn't make any sense. But Vickie wasn't done with Pat yet. She led him and his brothers, who had also never had time for her before, to see John. The image of the 78-year-old with his sunken cheeks and gaping mouth has never left Pat. He couldn't help but think that he looked like a ghoul in a horror movie. Nearly 2 weeks later, on January 24th, Vickie injected 95-year-old Oma Weiler with mivacurium. After the other nurses managed to revive the still breathing patient, Vickie bided her time for 4 days, then gave Oma another dose. This one proved fatal.
Despite the other nurses' misgivings, none of them truly believed that Vickie, who had zero complaints made about her throughout 2000, was the one behind all the deaths. But that was all about to change. On the night of January 30th, minutes after attacking Orville Moore, an 82-year-old retired ranch hand who had dubbed Vickie, lovely, a fat ass, Vickie approached 14-year-old Lydia Weatherred's bedside. The teenage girl who had been admitted for appendicitis was about to become Vickie's next victim for making the mistake of rejecting her son Curtis when he had asked her out. In response to this perceived transgression, Vickie retaliated against the child by injecting her with mivacurium chloride. She claimed it was a pain reliever, but shortly after the drug was administered and Vickie had made herself scarce, Lydia complained that her chest was hurting. Almost as soon as the words were out of her mouth, Lydia's voice failed her and she began clawing at her throat. Lydia's mother, who had been sitting next to her, cried out. Luckily, the doctor who had come in for Orville's respiratory arrest heard her shouts, raced into the room, and with the help of the other nurses, was able to save Lydia.
Undeterred by her botched murder, just before the shift change at 7 a.m. the following day, Vickie injected mivacurium into 46-year-old Donna Kernut's IV. Before she passed out, Donna pressed her nurse's button and croaked out, "I can't breathe. I'm having a reaction." While a doctor of the hospital only employed a handful and nurses rushed in to help, another medical professional yelled that 35-year-old Lisa Pelkey had also stopped breathing. Lisa had been a regular customer at the Third Spur at the same time as Vickie, but Lisa had had much more luck at the country music dance hall than Vickie ever had. Vickie was so forgettable that even during the injection, Lisa couldn't place her. Although Lisa was intubated before any brain damage occurred, Donna woke up briefly only to fall into a coma. She died a couple of weeks later on February 19th after her poisoned IV had unknowingly been restarted.
In light of 4 respiratory arrests in half as many days, a pharmacy technician at Nocona General went to Dr. Len Dingler, the hospital's chief of staff, about a crash cart that was a vial short of mivacurium chloride. Having discovered that their death rate had doubled in December 2000 and January 2001, the administration finally decided it was worth looking into. Once they had examined their records, they realized that Vickie was on shift to witness every respiratory arrest and was usually the last medical professional to come in contact with each of the now deceased patients before their code blue. As damning as we may think this sounds, this circumstantial evidence wasn't enough to fire her. So the Mivacron was taken off the crash carts and moved into the pharmacy where it had to be signed out. New measures were also implemented for code blues, but none of these precautions included monitoring Vickie.
Still in the clear, Vicky seized her opportunity to punish her disappointing third husband when it came knocking at the door with the hospitalization of Kirk's grandfather, 91-year-old E.E. Preacher Jackson, for a high fever and cellulitis. Having murdered the retired cotton farmer with mivacurium chloride on February 4th, Vicky first alerted the nurse station of his death, then broke the news to Kirk, who stepped outside to cry in private. As was fitting for Kirk's wife and Preacher's nurse, Vicky offered her sincere condolences at the funeral, repeatedly offered to help in any way she could, and even made a potato salad for the reception. Vicky may have taken her secret revenge by killing her husband's grandfather, but it would be the last murder she would ever carry out. Because 2 days after Preacher's death, Nocona General CEO Charles Norris spoke with Police Chief Kent Holcomb. Upon hearing about the many deaths, Chief Holcomb wasted no time in telling the district attorney what was going on. The DA's office asked for the FBI's involvement, and it was discovered that around 20 vials of the muscle relaxant were unaccounted for. As quick as the authorities were to pool their resources, they still didn't have any proof that Vicky was the killer. So they installed a hidden camera aimed at a crash cart with a vial labeled as mivacurium chloride, which actually only contains saline, to catch Vicky in the act of pilfering her preferred murder weapon.
A sting operation, I love it.
Me too. There's just no way of talking yourself out of being caught red-handed.
Having asked the rest of the staff to keep the investigation a secret, the night shift crew hid their doubts and hosted a potluck dinner for Vickie and her mother-in-law, Angela, in mid-February to celebrate their birthdays. Everyone ate cake and watched the two women unwrap bottles of lotion, candles, and teddy bears. Although Vickie held her stuffed toy and thanked the other nurses profusely, a few days later, she seemed to be feeling far more cruel than celebratory, but unbeknownst to her, she was choosing her final victim. 61-year-old Donnelly Reed had come in with post-polio syndrome and had improved after being given medication. He was about to be discharged when early in the morning on February 18th, Vickie walked up to the nurse's station to inform them of the snorting sound emanating from the nearly recovered patient. Even though they hadn't recorded anything incriminating with their secret camera, investigators had the doctor's word that Donnelly's illness wouldn't have caused him to go into respiratory arrest. So they knew Vickie must have found a way to get her hands on some Mivacron.
Fortunately, Donnelly was resuscitated and able to recount what had happened. He described how a blonde nurse had injected something into a saline drip, smiled, and asked if he needed anything else. She hadn't even made it to the hallway before Donnelly began struggling to breathe. Unluckily for Vickie, the 61-year-old not only survived, but was also able to identify her in a photo array. Having collected blood and urine samples from Donnelly and recovered his IV tubes, 2 days after the attack, investigators went to search Vickie and Kirk's home. The Texas Rangers and a DA's investigator combed through their curbside trash can and pulled out a syringe. It was tested, and traces of mivacurium chloride were discovered. Both Kirk and Vickie had no answer as to how the syringe had ended up in their garbage can. When she was first interrogated, Vickie expressed disbelief that any patient had been murdered. Perhaps deciding it was too late to feign complete ignorance, she then mentioned that plenty of her colleagues would have been able to commit the crime, but she didn't want to place the blame on anyone just yet.
Despite her attempts at ass covering, Vickie and Kirk were both fired from Nocona General on February 20th. Kirk may not have been a suspect. He was a nurse's aide who didn't administer medications and who hadn't been on shift when several of the deaths had occurred. But CEO Charles Norris thought the hospital was better off without the both of them. Although she must have known she was more than a person of interest, Vickie chose to carry on as if nothing had happened. She kept to her routines, smiling as she stopped in at the Dairy Queen for her taco basket. She'd eat in her usual back booth and take the opportunity to claim her innocence. When she bumped into her former crush one afternoon, she asked Pat Williams how he was doing. Pat had no idea how to respond to the nurse most people believed had killed his father. Kirk was at even more of a loss. He knew Vickie wasn't happy, but he didn't think that was enough of a reason for her to commit murder. Shocked as he was that his wife was a suspect, he ultimately moved to another town, far away from the woman who had been starring in his nightmares with a needle she planned to stick into him. His last bag had barely left the house before Vickie found herself back at the third spur with a friend. But unlike on her prior visits, Vickie was now getting plenty of attention and invitations to dance. Her notoriety seemed to be more of an attraction than her personality ever had been. God, people are weird.
You can say that again. While Vickie was living her best single life, the police were doggedly trying to get enough evidence to arrest her. They knew they needed proof that mivacurium had caused the respiratory arrests. But for that, they needed a court order that would allow them to exhume the bodies from cemeteries in both Texas and Oklahoma. And that wasn't the only hurdle. Because of the way the body metabolizes the drug, it's incredibly difficult to detect. So the FBI had to create an entirely new way of analyzing bodily fluids for traces of it. Although the exhumations and autopsies of the 10 deceased patients who were best suited for the testing got underway in June 2001, it would take 13 months to complete all the analysis. As the investigation continued, the victims' families weren't content with sitting on their hands now that they suspected their loved ones of being murdered. Several of them had sued Nocona General and the doctors for negligence by the time that their family members were unearthed from their graves. Harry Don Reed, Donnelly Reed's son, didn't just take legal action. He was so understandably upset that he yelled at his neighbor, Dr. Chance Dingler, who was the brother of the hospital's chief of staff, Len, that he had done nothing to protect his father. Donnelly had survived Vickie's attack, but he had hardly had time to file a lawsuit against her before he died from pneumonia on June 18, 2001.
Even with her legal troubles, Vickie was still a free woman. She made the most of that freedom by getting a job as an LVN at a Gainesville nursing home. That is beyond frightening.
And so different from the other cases we've covered.
Makes you never want to go to, I don't know, any medical facility.
I already feel that.
The administrators believed her when she said she enjoyed caring for older patients. However, they fired her only a few weeks later after they became suspicious that she was stealing medication. Fortunately, Vickie wouldn't have the chance to use that medication to kill anyone else. After each of the 10 exhumed bodies had been found to contain traces of mivacurium, chloride, the manner of death was changed to homicide. A grand jury indicted Vickie on 2 counts of capital murder for the deaths of 4 patients: 82-year-old J.T. Nichols, 65-year-old Jimmy Ray Holder, 95-year-old Oma Weiler, and Kirk's grandfather, 91-year-old E.E. Preacher Jackson. As for why there were only 2 counts for 4 murders, capital murder charges in Texas involve intentionally killing 2 or more people during the same course of conduct. So each of these counts corresponds to 2 of the deaths. With the evidence they had been waiting for in hand, authorities arrested 36-year-old Vickie in the deli department of a grocery store in Bowie in front of her stunned supervisor on July 16, 2002. Following her mother's arrest, Jennifer handed in a sealed box Vickie had left in her possession that held mementos of the murders, including Vickie's own notes, information about the murder weapon, and articles about the deaths. Her own little token treasure box.
It just grosses me out to think of killers caressing their trophies. In my mind, they always have creepy long fingernails, too.
Well, now I too am going to picture that.
Sorry about that. While she was being held at the Montague County Jail on a $2 million bond, Vickie watched DR, kept up with the romance magazine True Story, and stayed up to date on what was being said about her in the Nocona news. She befriended a few other prisoners and stuck to her story that she had never killed anyone. However, one of these former friends would later recount how after Vickie's attorney sent over the evidence the prosecution had against her, which included the autopsy photos, in response to a comment that expressed sympathy for the families, Vickie said, "Screw those families," which quite clearly contradicts her caring persona,
I mean, it's such a surprise.
isn't it? After years of legal delays, Vickie Dawn Jackson's trial was finally set for October 2006. Following a change of venue due to the publicity, Nocona residents were making plans to travel to San Angelo to find out why Vickie had killed 10 patients at Nocona General Hospital, not to mention the 10 other deaths she was suspected of, or the attempted murders of 5 more patients, all of which took place between December 11th, 2000 and February 18th, 2001. Jury selection was about to get underway when 40-year-old Vickie surprised everyone by pleading no contest to the capital murder charges on October 3rd, 2006. Explaining this abrupt turnaround, Vickie's lawyer, Bruce Martin, said she had pleaded no contest to prevent her daughter, Jennifer, from having to testify as one of the 58 witnesses for the prosecution.
Despite her claims of innocence and her supposed sympathy for the families, on October 5th, the judge handed down a life sentence, the maximum sentence she would have received if she had been found guilty by a jury. Now incarcerated at the Christina Milton Crane Unit in Gatesville, Texas, Vickie continues to insist that she was a compassionate nurse who could never kill anyone. With their mother physically removed from their lives, Vickie's son Curtis remained in Nocona, whereas Jennifer enlisted in the Navy. Lydia Weatherred, the teenage girl with appendicitis who had turned down Vickie's son, went on to write about the attack for her English class and to make plans to become a nurse herself because, as she so aptly put it, after what I've been through, I've decided we could use some better nurses. Lisa Pelkey, the popular Third Spur patron, relocated to the Northwest, gave up alcohol, and started going to church on a regular basis, which was her way of saying thank you to God for not letting me get murdered.
Even without a confession, it doesn't seem like a leap to conclude that Vickie chose to remain in this tiny town in northern Texas to go after those who had personally upset her or who had relatives who she felt had wronged her or her family. Unlike Amelia Dyer, Vickie didn't have a financial motive. She wasn't out to save her career like Megan Haynes, and she certainly wasn't a mercy killer helping patients in pain along their way. She filled each of her syringes with mivacurium chloride, intent on getting revenge. Next week, we'll be continuing our series on female killer nurses when we discuss the case of Allison Firth.
All the sources we used for this episode are in the show notes below. If you'd like to suggest a case or theme for us to discuss, you can email us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us at terrifyinglytypicalpodcast on Instagram and at terrifyinglytypicalpod on TikTok. Feel free to leave us a comment, rating, or review to let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your opinions.
See you next week.